Hello and welcome to the Predictable B2B Success Podcast brought to you by Sproutwood.com. I'm Vinay Koshi and our guest today is Nora. Sorry, Nora, I should have done this before. How do you pronounce your last name? Sudduth. Okay. Nora Sudduth. And Nora, you're the co-founder of Hello Audio, which I believe is a platform that turns your content into private podcasts so your audience can listen to it on the go. You're really marketing and communication strategist, I suppose, other than being the co-founder of this platform. And you've actually had quite a bit of experience. In fact, you used to head up the partner program at Clickfunnels. Is that correct?
Yeah, I created their certification program and I
Yep.
created another one of their coaching programs. Yep.
There you go. And most of our listeners would be familiar with Clickfunnels, so that'll give them some context. But just to add to that, you've helped businesses sell well over $500 million worth of products and services online. And of course, helped design courses, coaching, certification programs, as you just mentioned, that have generated millions more. But I'm curious, Nora, doing all of that seems a far cry from creating private podcasts. So I'm curious, how did you even get into the podcasting space, let alone private podcasts?
Oh, I love it. So if you don't know it's where's the bridge, right? Where's the
Right.
bridge? Actually, I spent 15 plus years in corporate America, and my background's actually in technology. So I have a handful of college degrees, but the first one and my first love was computer science. And so I've always been drawn to SaaS companies. Back in my corporate career, I worked for a number of SaaS companies, including ExactTarget, who ended up having a successful exit to Salesforce. And so it's always been a passion of mine using tech to get success for our clients. I'm obsessed with client success. And that's why I love designing coaching programs and courses that are all geared to help customers get success. And actually, Lindsay and Derek, my co-founders at Hello Audio, had this amazing idea. They're also professors. They're former community college professors. They also genuinely and deeply care about their student success. And then they started talking about private podcasts and how we could leverage private podcasts to help consumption rate of courses. That's how it started. Originally, this product was actually called Podcast Your Course. And it was all to help students be able to listen on the go. Because we all know that especially for adult learners, we have children, we have lots of priorities, sometimes a corporate job, and all of those things take up space. And by being able to turn all sorts of content, initially courses, into a private podcast, it really fueled, just poured gasoline on the fire when we're talking about client success. So that's why I ended up jumping aboard onto Hello Audio, because it's amazing. And it has more applications in marketing, which obviously I'm really passionate about, and all of those types of things. So that's why I jumped into Hello Audio.
Brilliant. And I'd love to dive into that in a little bit, but I'm also curious, given your journey to date and the wealth of experiences you've had, what would you say is your personal area of strength?
Synthesizing complicated information. I recognize patterns, frameworks, systems. And I've been doing that since I was probably really young. I can look at a whole bunch of information and be able to boil it down to something that is consumable, is easy. It's easy to follow, and creating those step-by-step processes and taking all of the noise and all of the unnecessary complications out of it is truly what helps folks get success. And so that's, I think, probably one of my biggest areas of strength is I can get bottom line. Let's bottom line it. That's something I can do.
And in that area of strength, what would you say is something that businesses don't know but should?
When I work with businesses on a consultative basis, I'm either working to optimize top line revenue when it comes to marketing, or I'm optimizing bottom line revenue, which means I'm usually streamlining a lot of unnecessary waste in their delivery and fulfillment cycles. And so I think a lot of times as we design our programs, sure, if we go on top line, there's marketing strategies for everyone. Everything works. It may not work for you. You have to do some trial and error, run experiments, because that's all marketing is, to really figure out what is going to work. And it's really identifying those repeatable systems on the top line revenue and being able to pivot and keeping it fresh. Because as markets evolve and marketing evolves, your avatar or your client is evolving, you have to stay on top of it. And most people understand that, and they understand that things shift because they feel the effects very immediately. But what most people don't realize that have courses or coaching programs or certification programs, really any sort of client-facing fulfillment, agencies included, is that usually there's so much opportunity to create more efficiency in your fulfillment and delivery, which ultimately affects your margins and your profitability. And there's a lot more waste than I think people realize. And there's a lot more, I think, that can be done in terms of profitability gains on that bottom line revenue. And you don't have to sacrifice client success. That's a big thing for me is yes, you can streamline that and you don't have to sacrifice the results that your clients get.
Love it. And I'm sure many of the listeners who are business owners or executives who are quite keen to grow their own businesses to fulfill its true potential would be really interested in that perspective, given that they are really interested in creating remarkable experiences or growth through remarkable experiences, be it via content or conversation. So with this idea of private podcasts, the original idea was to podcast courses. And having been in university, as we call it here, or college, as you would in America, I can certainly understand how some courses would lend easily to more an audio format, as opposed to, say, something like engineering courses or maths, for example, where visuals would really help in order to understand how a process works. Is that true of private podcasts, or thinking about private podcasts as well, or is there more to how you could transform content?
I love it because we're not against video. I think that's one big thing is we're not saying video is dead. We're not saying visuals are dead. And for a lot of our folks that have more visual courses, they include maybe links to specific videos or to resources or PDFs or images in our show notes, in a normal podcast show notes. So we still have them there. But where I think the audio is beneficial is all in pre-framing, right? If we think about, if you're just going to allow folks to listen, it takes the pressure off quite a bit where you're not having to figure it out. There's no, and typically in online courses or learning management systems, you have to click that button next or click the button continue. And a lot of times you don't necessarily, you haven't absorbed it all and you don't necessarily want to take that action, or you don't necessarily want to do that homework assignment. You really want to see where you're headed. And so where audio, I think, is really beneficial, even for those really visual courses, and it allows the student to know where you're taking them. And it allows them to listen to it. And we know repetition is key for learning. That's been proven, time and time again. And so allowing them to just consume this content in a very no pressure or low pressure way at their convenience while they're doing the dishes, while they're taking their kid to soccer, walking the dog, it actually will improve how they perform when they do log into that learning management system, or when they do show up to the lecture, or when they do sit down with the workbook or the visual or the presentation. They'll have heard it before, and that actually improves their ability to be successful with that content the second time that they actually sit down and look at it. So there's still benefits there, even if it is a visual course. We have folks, to give you a couple of examples, we have folks that do Facebook ads. We have someone who teaches Facebook ads, and that's a very visual thing. God bless the ads manager and all the things that are going on, and it changes all the time. And so that person does a step-by-step walkthrough of how to set up their ads in a very specific way using their framework. And yet they're seeing their client success rate to jump just because their clients, they've actually logged in and listened to it, or they're listening to it without having to log into the platform. So they're reducing friction. And when they do log in and do the step-by-step or follow those things, they're just so much better prepared to take those actions.
Okay. Let's start with this. How would you define private podcasts so that we're clear in our minds as to what it actually entails?
Absolutely. So most people are familiar with the public podcast, right? If you're listening to this is an amazing public podcast, right? And this is open to anyone. So anyone in the world can subscribe to this public podcast. And you as the owner know that people are downloading episodes when people subscribe, but you don't really know a whole lot of details about who they are. You might know that they're on an Android or an iOS device. You might know where they are in the world, but their access it's open. And so where private podcasts are different is they operate and they feel just like a normal public podcast. They play in your favorite podcast player on your phone, anyone that is going to accept an RSS feed. And there's a few other nuances to that, but it feels just like a normal public podcast. But you get to control who gets access to it. and for how long. So that's the very first difference between a private and a public podcast, is that you grant access, which means you can now put your premium or gated content, whether you're going to require in exchange for someone's email, or it's a paid product where someone's going to purchase it and give you cash, and you're going to give them access to this. Access to a private podcast is actually tied to that specific person's email address. So now, as an owner, you know exactly when that person is listening, what episodes they're listening to, and when they're listening to it. So that's one of the biggest differences between a private and public. There's two more. The second difference is how content is delivered. So a public podcast, everyone gets the same content at the same time. This episode is going to release on a very specific date for everyone. With private podcasts, yes, you can do date-driven releases. So every episodes can be released for the same content for everyone. And there's other ways to deliver private podcast content. So it's dripped out on an evergreen basis, which means my day one could be today. Your day one, if you subscribe, could be next week. And so we're listening to the same exact feed, the same exact content, same podcast, same private podcast, but our schedules in terms of how we get the information is going to be different, which is great for challenges and other nurture sequences as you bring people into your world. The other thing that you can do from a delivery standpoint is actually personalize your content, which means based on each listener, I can deliver a specific episode to you that I wouldn't necessarily deliver to someone else. And it's based on tags. So now I want you to think a little bit more like an audio CRM, where you can tag your listeners with specific things like you're a buyer or you're not a buyer yet. And I can now give you specific episode content. I can put pre-roll and post-roll that's specific to your tags. So now not only am I making it more relevant to you, I can play with timing, I can make things more relevant, but I have a lot more information about each listener and their listener behavior. And I can take actions on those listener behaviors. Like when you listen to a specific episode, I can fire a webhook, and now I know exactly what to follow up your conversation with, because I can keep that conversation between us more relevant and more timely.
In order to give access to a listener, they would have to register. Is that correct? And you would have to approve them?
So with Hello Audio specifically, we integrate with Zapier and we integrate with other platforms as well. So we have a direct integration with ActiveCampaign, and we're working on direct integrations with other folks. But if you had a landing page and you grab someone's email address, you can absolutely just automatically give them access to whatever private feed that they opted in for. Same thing with a purchase. If that purchase could be a trigger, and you can automatically give them access to a specific feed, and you don't have to, not manual. You can do it manually if you want to, but you don't have to. It can be automated.
Okay. And in terms of creating the content, you gave us the example of a Facebook ads person using the platform. Would we need to rethink how we create this content? Because if we were doing video, we could probably say, now click on this, and you can literally watch the person click through the ads manager or whatever the case may be. As we create a private podcast, would you suggest perhaps the broader steps, but then tell the listener to go watch an associated video or a link in the show notes to get more detail? Is that pretty much how it would work?
You absolutely could. It's your choice as the educator or as the owner of that content, as the content creator. You get to choose what that experience looks like. I would say we have folks that do a little bit of both. We have folks that want to just give folks the ability to listen and make it a lot easier for them to consume that data. So all they do is drag and drop their existing videos. We strip out the audio for them automatically, so you don't have to go to some weird janky site to try to get your audio out, right? Some of those sites are a little shady. And so then they just line them up as if they're course or similar to how their student would experience it. And then away they go. And they don't give too much thought, because the way they're pre-framing it to their students as this is the same exact content, and we're just allowing you to listen to it. And so that way there's no expectations that content is different. We absolutely have folks that maybe tailor their audio or are more aware of their student experience as they go through that. So they might make some adjustments or choose to only maybe provide theoretical or conceptual information, or things that maybe provide a new way of thinking or a new way of inspiring or motivating people, or belief. Sometimes we have to rebuild beliefs in our students in order for them to take those actions. And sometimes they'll focus on that content as well. I think the biggest thing too that we're seeing in our members is that they're podcasting so much more than just course or educational information. They're using it for marketing. They're using it for employee onboarding. They're using it for client onboarding. They're using it for private podcasts for themselves. So if they've hired a coach and they're getting their replays on Zoom and they don't necessarily, that coach dropped some gold or that coach helped reframe some things for them. Now they have a personal feed that they can listen to on the go and relive some of those things or rethink some of those things. So there's a lot of ways that people are actually leveraging the communication channel of podcasts, not being restricted to other things that maybe you would think they have to be delivered in that way.
Okay. And what is the take-up rate with this as opposed to, say, public podcasts and things of that nature? Is there still some resistance to the idea of private podcasts and trying to get their mind around how best to apply it to their particular circumstance?
I think with Hello Audio, we're providing so many new examples of how to use it that every time we come up with a new way, and it's not just us, our members are coming up with creative ways to use it. And they're like, that's fantastic. We never really thought about that. So while we may have come up with 50, our users are adding 50 more. And that's really helpful for people to realize how they can leverage the communication channel to reach more of their audience or to unlock all of the hours of the day where we're not sitting here at the screen. And how many of us don't really want to sit at the screen any longer than we have to? So there's that. I would say as we look at all the different ways to use it, most of the folks who are gravitating toward private podcasts initially are creators who just want to reach their audience. They're course creators who want to increase consumption in their content. There's copywriters who are writing amazing emails, but they're not necessarily getting the open rate that they used to because the inbox is noisy. And so we have a lot of content creators that just want to increase consumption, because we all know when people increase consumption, they typically take an action that we want them to take, whether that's buy, whether that's whatever that is, have success, take action, all those things. I would say as we look at the folks who are typically using public podcasts, what they're getting marketed to right now is, use a private feed to monetize your public feed. So just do more content, just do behind the scenes content. And while yes, you can. And the models aren't great. It's like charge $5 a month. You're like, that's not, you have to have volume, right? In order to monetize and make money that way. And where I think we've come into the market and said, you can podcast all sorts of content. We have folks charging $1,000 for their coaching programs and they're podcasting that content. So you're not just limited to $5 a month, $7 a month, or that model. And it's a lot more than just behind the scenes or ad-free type of a model. I think that, so we tend to appeal more toward the folks who don't necessarily have a public podcast. Now, Hello Audio does provide public podcast hosting as well. That's just not our specialty. So we do have folks that absolutely have public podcasts, but they're not using it to share behind the scenes or more interview content. They're using it to really monetize, to go beyond that, to create digital products that are delivered that way.
Okay. Could you give us some context in terms of how a company that's going, there's probably a few ideas running around in my head as to how we could apply this. What would be a good place to start, number one? And perhaps even before that, what do we need to have in place to even consider a private podcast as part of our overall mix, as it were, whether it be a marketing strategy or as an add-on for customer success or support, etc.?
Yep. So it's really content. That's what you should have. And and here's the cool part is if you don't already have content, if we think about creating content. So let's say you're just starting out, you haven't productized your expertise yet, and you're thinking, I've got to go create my course. If you think about how long it's going to take you to create a video course versus how long it might take you to create an audio only course, it speeds up the production process. Right now, audio allows you to have rapid content creation, rapid asset creation, which is really great. And we do have folks that are just starting out that don't necessarily want to invest a lot of money in an LMS and all the things. And all they're doing is sitting down. All they need is even a $12 lapel mic from Amazon or wherever you get it. They can sit in their closet. So there's better noise reduction. They sit in their car and they just talk. And I think that's a huge benefit for folks. Now, if you do have content, We typically look at this in 3 different buckets. So a lot of times we have folks with marketing content, and they can use private podcasts. So that I'll give you a couple of examples. Then there's usually fulfillment content, like your courses or your coaching calls, your coaching program, those types of things. And then we have more internal use. So onboarding, team employee onboarding is huge. Before they get access to your email, or Slack channel, or all the things, it's so easy to provide someone with a private podcast, right? You can have a message with your immediate supervisor. You can share all of the information that you would have typically shared within an employee handbook 10 years ago that no one is going to read anymore. Talk about your company values, share some case studies or customer success stories so they can get excited about what they're doing in your company. So there's a lot of ways to use it internally as well. I would say right now we have a pretty even mix between marketing and fulfillment. And then we're still growing. I would say our members are still experimenting with more of that internal kind of podcasting for work, if you will. And look at it, we do have folks that are using it for onboarding quite successfully, but I would say the large majority of our clients right now are either using it for marketing and or fulfillment. And most of them are using it for both. And usually on the marketing side, we think about all the types of content we create on marketing, right? Whether that's blog posts that aren't necessarily getting read, email newsletters. If you think about live events that you might hold, like workshops or challenges or summits, I think are really big. Summits are a big one because you have so many presentations and you're probably marketing to really busy people. I don't know anyone that doesn't have a busy audience, and gold is being dropped in each one of those presentations. But we all know we're probably not going to log into the members area and watch every single video. But I can still get those amazing gems and takeaways if you would have put all of those speaker recordings in a private podcast that I could listen to on the go. So if you think about, it's a little bit of a mix between marketing and fulfillment, because we have folks that are using those private podcasts as upsells, right? And like that VIP ticket that you can charge for, even if the summit was free, there's a lot of ways to do that. And every single time what we're seeing on the marketing side is that it's just increasing consumption, using it for your webinar. We have folks that have live webinars. No matter what time you pick, people are not going to show up. That's just the name of the game. Show up rates are down. If you put that webinar content into a podcast, into a private podcast, you know exactly who got access to it and when they're listening, which is huge, because then you know who to follow up with and who not to. And then you're also seeing an increase in conversion rate, sometimes up to 20 or 30% of a bump in conversions, simply because you made it easier for them to consume the content. It's huge.
Certainly. And in terms, so you've spoken about conversion rates. What about the actual engagement rate? Could you speak to that?
Absolutely. So we're seeing, if we think about how many people are coming, so I'll use a challenge because that seems to be pretty popular again, right? Now these days, whether it's a 5-day or 7-day challenge, typically if you do a live challenge, you'll see a drop-off rate in engagement day to day. And so what we typically see, sometimes it can be up to 50% every day. Sometimes it's 20%. It depends on your topic and how great. Maybe you have prizes or those types of things to help encourage people to stay on. What we're seeing with a private podcast is that's increasing engagement. Based on what their previous challenge was, they're seeing engagement rates increase by 20 or 30% again. And so sometimes all the way up to 50% in terms of what people are actually engaged. And really, it's not rocket science. If you think about why, the content is the same. We have folks that ran the exact same challenge without a private podcast and then ran it with a private podcast. And they saw obviously conversion rates go up, but the reason why is because their engagement rates, right? It's like a leading indicator of what they can expect their final ending launch numbers might be. And it's because more people are engaging with the content simply because it's easier to engage.
Certainly. And with the private podcasts, are these pegged as an add-on to a course, or you talked about courses being offered, and then with that comes access to a private podcast. But are you seeing people offer this as a bonus offer or like a one-time offer and seeing good conversions with that as well?
Absolutely. We've seen it. A lot of folks will architect it in their own way. So for some folks, they just include it as part of the package, right? So you get this. And a lot of our folks that do that use it to combat the typical objection, which is, I don't have time. Right? It's a very common objection when people go to buy your course or your coaching program. I don't have time for this, or I can't, what time are the live calls? Oh, I can't make that. That's when my son has soccer, whatever that looks like. And so a lot of times they'll just include that up front. as a way to really speak to that objection. Oh, you don't have time? Not a problem. I'm making it easier for you to fit it into your busy schedule. So we have a lot of folks that do that. We do also have folks that include it as a bonus and position it as a bonus. Sometimes they'll actually create a new asset because it is so easy to create assets with audio, and they'll include that as a bonus. Sometimes an upsell as well. So we have folks that will, just depends on how their offer stat goes and how they want to do it. But I would say for the large majority of the folks that include it, it's because they want to speak to the I don't have time objection. We do have some authors as well that include, for example, multi-page ebooks or longer ebooks. Mm-hmm. We're seeing that as soon as they swap that out or bundle it with the audio version of that,
right,
all of a sudden now we see conversions go up. And that why is because everyone knows that PDF is going in the graveyard of PDFs. We all have one, whether it's your computer, Dropbox, or all over the place. We all have, some of us have multiple, myself included. And by giving them the audio version, they know I'm a lot more likely, they trust themselves more. I'm a lot more likely to consume that information. Yes, I'm going to raise my hand and say, yes, that's the type of channel or medium I need in order to get the information I want.
And you said that we should really be thinking about content. And here's the thing, a lot of companies I've noticed would have websites and perhaps on the back end, a lot of support and service type documentation. Let's take an example, say a website that has about 1,000 pages visible to the public. If you look at the average cost of, say, producing some of this, it's probably between $500 to $1,000. So you're looking at something in north of a $500,000 asset in marketing content alone, let alone all the support documentation, etc. But most of it never gets read. In fact, on the search engine itself, you'd probably get maybe 10, 20% of it doing anything for you. You're almost suggesting that we could revitalize a lot of that existing content by using private podcasts and then have that assign a specific task to each of those pieces of content. So you could have salespeople using some of that content in overall process, support folks, of course, just saying, here's an audio. You don't have to watch the whole video or the webinar. You can just listen to this little snippet. Would that be the right type of thinking?
Yes. And I think one of the things you can do on the support side, so we have an embeddable player. So right. You can actually embed it right there in the page. And that way people can hit play and they can listen to whatever it is that they want to listen to. It's great for previews. If you want to pre-sell a course, here's the first episode. That's really great. I would say this, if you have a site that has a significant amount of marketing content, right? Whether you're a HubSpot and you're on that end of the spectrum, or even if you have, I would say a decent sized blog where you have invested days, years, potentially writing this content, it's actually, and how many people are really seeing it? How many people are going back to really read it and get that level of exposure? You can take some of, and sometimes we have folks that do segmentation. So if you talk about different topics in your blog, you might take one topic and do the best of series and maybe make it a series of the top 10 blog posts you've ever written on that article. Now, all of a sudden you can productize it. You didn't do anything different other than maybe hire, if you don't want to speak it, maybe you hired a voice actor to talk and read your blog post in a way. You've given them a call to action. So it's just so much more engaging. And what we've seen, especially for the folks that have been really great writers and they've invested time, as soon as they put it in an audio format, all of a sudden they see consumption increase and people are a lot more likely to take action because they've actually consumed the content.
And I guess hosting is the key issue. Hello Audio certainly offers hosting. But if, let's say, a company had their content hosted elsewhere, is there a way that they could convert some of that into a private podcast? Because most of those platforms, as far as I'm aware, don't necessarily allow for it to be, how should I say, put under wraps, so to speak.
That's true. I don't know if there are any other private podcast companies that allow you to host the audio yourself. Right. That I'm not sure of. One of the reasons why, so with Hello Audio, we obviously host all of the audio clips. And for a lot of that too, we also stitch together audio. So we do provide dynamic content with pre and post roll content as well.
Right.
And I think that's another reason why, but I assume other companies do too, so they can get the analytics and that kind of. So I don't know of any other companies that allow you to do your hosting. That's honestly where the expense comes, is in that bandwidth. cost too. So I don't know if anyone would really want to host that own content. And you should, I know for Hello Audio terms and conditions, obviously, even though we're hosting it, you own it, right? You always own your content. Just make sure if you are using a podcast hosting company, you are reading that just to make sure that no matter who's hosting it, you're still the owner of that content.
And to get a little bit technical, most of these podcast hosts would offer an RSS feed that would then be submitted to something like Spotify or Apple Podcasts, etc. I'm assuming that you generate an RSS feed, but you give that specific link to your potential users.
That's right. So that's exactly what we do. We generate that RSS link, and that RSS link is unique and tied to that email address. The other thing we do is we allow it to expire after one click. So if you really want to if you have sensitive information, if it's an employee only podcast, or even folks that just pay you, you don't necessarily want them sharing all of your content all over the internet, which, people do regardless of kind of whatever membership site you put them in. But that way that link can expire immediately when that chosen or that individual that's supposed to have access clicks on that link and loads it into their podcast player, then that link will expire and it won't work for anyone else, no matter who they may or may not send it to, which is really important. We also are one of a handful of companies right now that have worked and have been approved, and we're Spotify partners, so that we're actually able there, because not all private podcasts will display on Spotify, but we have a special partnership and an arrangement with Spotify. So our private podcast can be played on Spotify.
Is there anything else that you would recommend we think about as we entertain this idea of potentially starting a private podcast?
I think a lot of folks, when you think about launching a public podcast, it's a commitment. Right? You show up you have interviews, you have to schedule interviews, you vet your host. So it's an ongoing commitment. And when you have a private podcast, it can be contained. It's not like you have to start a show, right? You can podcast all sorts of different content. And I think where we see our users come back to us time and time again, because like with most tech, right? Most SaaS companies, the biggest objection for people to invest or purchase a new SaaS product is, it's going to take me forever to figure it out. Or, I'm never going to use it. I don't need another tech tool in my business. And right now with Hello Audio, this is a stat we've been tracking because it's important. Again, client success is something we're obsessed with, is over 70% of our users launch that first feed in less than a day. And that's really important. And usually we have a whole bunch of people that came back and said, man, if I would have known how easy it was, I would have just done this sooner. I just made the assumption that it was going to take me a while, or that the learning curve would be too high. So I would say with private podcasts, it's not as complicated and it's not as intense as you might think. And it doesn't really cost that much money to create a private podcast. And the benefits that you get from a marketing insight perspective and analytics, and also that your clients get, the benefits that they get, I think is immeasurable when it comes to that. It's not that complicated. And I think that's what most people just assume, it's a podcast, it's going to be a lot of work. It's really not.
In terms of engagement, what have you seen companies do better than others in terms of ensuring that their content is engaging, but also it continues to be, how should I put it, remark worthy?
Yes. So, and it does come down a lot to the content and understanding your customer, right? That he or she that knows their customer the best tends to win and is able to serve them with the information. I will say this. We've specifically done some things in Hello Audio to make it easier to connect with your listener. And so just like in ActiveCampaign and other CRMs where you can personalize that first name, hi, Nora. And so we're actually able to do that in an episode title. So your first name can show up in your episode title, which kind of makes it feel more personal, more intimate. Audio is more intimate. So if we look at the studies that show how connection is formed, and that has everything to do with the person's heart rate when they listen or they consume information, audio beats every other medium. And that to me is, why are we not using this to connect with our people, whether it's on the front end before they become customers, or after they've already become customers and we really truly care about their success and we want them to be able to take whatever action or get the information that they need. So if I think about it that way, I look at private podcasts as this amazing opportunity to use this medium that's intimate. And the folks that I think are having the most success do personalize that content. They do think about their customer journey. They use their first name. They use tailored episodes, or they use more customized pre-roll and post-roll that's more relevant to that listener's journey. And I would say the folks that are more successful are the ones that are truly thinking about each individual listener versus just a spray and pray mentality of publishing content. They're truly using the segmentation abilities of something like a private podcast and Hello Audio to deliver relevant content that's timely. And they're using it like a communication channel. This is the new inbox for them. And it just makes it's just so much easier to reach your people where they're already at. I think that to me, all of the folks that we're seeing that are having the most success are the folks that are doing those things.
Brilliant. Nora, I know you've been on a number of podcasts and things of that nature, talked a fair bit about private podcasts, but do you feel that there's an aspect or aspects to private podcasting that doesn't get a lot of airtime or highlighted and should? If so, what would it be?
I think most of the folks that talk about private podcasts talk about that $5 per month. It's the Patreon model. It's the Apple Podcast Premium or Spotify Premium. And when they speak, they're speaking to podcasters. And so podcasters already know the value of podcasting. That's why they're doing it. But it's not just about just adding more content. I think where most people, they don't necessarily think about this until we have conversations like this. And it's all the different types of ways that we can use these private podcasts. So one way that we don't talk about very often that most people don't think about is with physical products. So if we think about e-commerce, right? If you sell a widget, if you sell a candle, so we have someone that sells room sprays and candles. And so by putting a QR code on their packaging and having a customer scan that QR code and it opens up a private podcast meditation series, or with another, it's all of a sudden now all of the e-commerce folks that struggle sometimes to create a digital relationship with their people. This is an amazing way to be able to reach someone in a very low pressure way and open up a communication channel with them that they wouldn't normally have, they wouldn't otherwise have. So we think about things like that. I would say another use case that doesn't come up at all is trade shows and booth marketing. So if we think about booth marketing, right, you're in the trade shows, it's busy, booths, if it's that QR code, scan that QR code, and all of a sudden people are walking around the convention center with you in their ears, listening to all of the really cool stuff that maybe it's entertainment, all of the things that you're providing is you're in their ears, even if they walk away from your booth. And so there are so many unique ways to use private podcasts. And I think we're really just starting to see how this is going to evolve, because as we look at audio, what was old is now new. And that's because a lot of us after post-pandemic, we don't want to sit on Zoom calls. We don't want to be sitting and now, at least here in the US, at other places where it's summer, kids are going to be out of school. People are going to be more active. They're not going to want to sit at their desk and watch things for hours on end. This is going to be an amazing way to reach your audience. I would say the other thing too, if I look at just the pure stats and numbers, if we look at the number of hours that people are consuming content in their podcast app of choice, so I know there's many, but if we look at how many hours they're just listening to podcasts, it actually was right. And now, granted, this is before Netflix had some issues, but it was rivaling the number of hours that people were watching Netflix each and every week, which is huge. And we don't think about that. So as soon as we say that, we're thinking, why are we not meeting people where they're already at? You don't need a show. You don't need to do interviews. Why are we not using private podcasts purely as a communication channel to reach our audience? I think that to me is probably one of the things we'll start seeing a lot more of. I think we're just at the beginning stages of this trend.
And thank you for that. To wrap things up, Nora, if you were listening to this podcast episode, what would you say would be your top takeaway?
Oh, you have to try it. I mean, to me, that's one of the biggest things. You've got to try this and really see for yourself. So don't just take my word for it. I would just go and try it. And honestly, at Hello Audio, we believe so much in the power of private podcasts. We even there's a free, no credit card required trial. So try it for 7 days. There is you have no risk at all. We're not taking your credit card up front, and just see what you think. See if you're getting engagement, test it out with your audience. I think the biggest thing is a takeaway is see what it can do. Run the experiment. I think you'll be really pleasantly surprised by the numbers that you see coming on the back end of it.
Brilliant. Nora, if listeners are curious and wanting to find out more or even connect with you, where would you recommend they head to?
Absolutely. So you can connect with me at norasudduth.com or at Nora Sudduth on Instagram. And with Hello Audio, we're at Hello Audio FM on Instagram and helloaudio.fm online.
Brilliant. Nora, thank you so much for this. It's been brilliant.
Thanks for having me.